The 3 moons of Arisia cast long shadows across the royal palace as Prince Tala paced the smooth stone floor of his chamber. His blue skin glowed with stress patterns, small dots of light that pulsed faster with each turn he made. "Is everything ready?" he asked, not looking at Commander Vex, who stood at attention by the door. "Yes, Your Highness. The transport ship will arrive within the hour. The human ambassador waits at the spaceport." Tala stopped and looked out the crystal window. The capital city spread below, its buildings shimmering with the bioluminescent technology of his people. He had worked for months on this plan, and now the moment had come. "And my sister, how does Princess Lyra feel about all this?" Commander Vex shifted his weight, his armor making a slight clicking sound. "She accepts her duty to the Empire. She has packed her royal items and is saying goodbye to her handmaids." Tala nodded. Poor Lyra. The royal doctors had declared her barren last season, a devastating blow for an Orisian royal. In their culture, royalty existed to continue the bloodline. A princess who could not bear children had little value except as a political tool. The human truly agreed to these terms? Tala asked. "He understands that she cannot give him children." Ambassador Reed accepted immediately. Vex replied. "Humans seem to care less about such things. They have strange customs about marriage." This was perfect for Tala's plan. The growing human presence on the edge of Orisian space worried the king. This marriage would create a bond between their peoples without risking the royal bloodline. The humans would feel honored by receiving a princess, never knowing they were given damaged goods. "Does father still approve?" Tala asked. "King Vorn believes this is the best use for Princess Lyra now. He signed the final papers this morning." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. When it opened, Princess Lyra entered. Her royal markings glowed softly against her blue skin, patterns that showed her high birth. Unlike her brother, she kept her emotions hidden, her face calm and still. "Brother," she said with a small bow, "I came to say goodbye." Tala crossed the room and took her hands in his. "This is not goodbye forever, Lyra. You will visit for royal functions, and I will come see you in the human territories." Lyra's silver eyes studied his face. "We both know that's not true. Once I leave, I become a human's wife. The court will forget me." "The human seems kind," Tala said quickly. "Ambassador Reed has been on Arisia for 2 years. He speaks our language well and respects our customs. I'm sure he's very nice for a human." Lyra said, her voice flat. "At least my failure will serve some purpose." Tala squeezed her hands. "You have not failed, sister. The doctors might be wrong." "They tested me 7 times, she replied. "My body lacks the royal fertility factor. I cannot continue our line." Commander Vex cleared his throat. "Princess, the transport awaits. We must leave soon to meet the schedule." Lyra nodded and pulled away from her brother. "At least humans don't glow when they're sad," she said, looking down at her own skin where small dots of light betrayed her sorrow. "Perhaps that will make things easier." As she turned to leave, Tala called after her. "The human world has beautiful sunsets, I hear. 2 suns instead of 3 moons." Lyra paused at the doorway. Maybe being different won't matter so much. After she left, Tala returned to the window. His plan was perfect. The human got a royal wife, improving relations with Earth. The Orisian court removed the embarrassment of a barren princess, and Lyra would have some purpose, even if not the one she was born for. Everything would work out for the best. What could possibly go wrong? James Reed stood alone at the spaceport, watching the Orisian royal transport descend from the orange evening sky. His heart beat faster as the sleek silver ship touched down, its engines humming softly before powering down. 5 years studying the Orisian culture had led to this moment. 2 years serving as Earth's ambassador on their world had earned him respect, but this marriage would change everything. The humans needed this alliance. The Orisians controlled trade routes that Earth desperately wanted access to. "Nervous?" asked Marcus, his aide who approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. James accepted one cup with a nod. Wouldn't you be? I'm about to marry an alien princess I've only seen in official photos. An alien princess they don't want, Marcus reminded him quietly. The reports from our spies are clear. She's considered damaged goods because she can't have children. James frowned. That's their mistake, not hers. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss. Royal guards in silver armor filed out first, forming a path. Then she appeared. Princess Lyra stood tall and proud at the top of the ramp. Her blue skin caught the sunset light, making her royal markings glow like delicate jewelry embedded in her flesh. Her silver eyes scanned the small welcoming party until they found James. He stepped forward and bowed in the Orician style, right hand over his heart, left extended palm up. Welcome to Earth, Princess Lyra. I am James Reed. She descended the ramp with perfect grace, her long formal robes flowing around her. Up close, he could see she was taller than him by several inches, like most Oricians. Ambassador Reed, she said formally, placing her hand in his outstretched one. Her skin felt smooth and slightly cooler than a human's. I bring greetings from King Vorn and the Orician Empire. James smiled. Please, call me James. We're to be married tomorrow, after all. A small pulse of light ran across her facial markings, betraying surprise or perhaps discomfort. As you wish, James. I've arranged quarters for you in the diplomatic tower. Would you like to rest after your journey? Or perhaps you'd like to see some of the city first? Lyra glanced at the Earth sunset painting the clouds pink and gold. Your world has beautiful colors, she said softly. For the first time, James saw something beyond royal formality in her expression. The quarters can wait, he decided. Let me show you the botanical gardens. The night-blooming flowers are opening soon. An hour later, they walked among exotic earth plants. Lyra stopped often to examine flowers and trees her world didn't have. Her royal guards kept a respectful distance, allowing them some privacy. May I ask you something, James? She said as they paused beside a small pond. Anything. You know why they sent me, don't you? Why my father agreed to this marriage. James met her silver eyes. I know what they believe about you. That I'm barren, useless for continuing the royal line. Her markings pulsed with emotion she tried to hide. Yet you agreed to marry me anyway. Why? Political marriages happen for many reasons, James said carefully, and humans don't view these things the same way Oricians do. Lyra studied him with those otherworldly eyes. What aren't you saying? James smiled gently. Your doctors tested you with Orician genetic material, correct? 7 times, she confirmed, but never with human genetic material. Lyra's markings flashed with surprise. What are you suggesting? Just that different species have different biology. What makes you incompatible with Orician males might not matter with humans. That's, she paused, considering. That's impossible. Our species are too different. James shrugged. Maybe. Maybe not. We've never tested it. For the first time since her arrival, Lyra smiled. It transformed her face from regal to beautiful. You're either very clever or very foolish, James Reed. I've been called both, he admitted. Which would you prefer your husband to be? Her markings pulsed with what he now recognized as amusement. Perhaps a bit of both. 6 months passed since the wedding ceremony that united Princess Lyra of Oriceo with Ambassador James Reed of Earth. Their marriage had started formally, almost coldly, but grew warmer with each passing week. The public appearances required of them became less of a duty and more of a joy as they learned each other's ways. On this particular morning, Lyra woke feeling strange. Her body felt different, heavier somehow. The sensation had been growing for weeks, but today it was impossible to ignore. James, she called, her voice uncertain. Something is wrong with me. He appeared in the doorway of their bedroom, concern written across his face. What is it? I don't know. She placed a hand on her abdomen. I feel changed. James sat beside her on the bed. You've been tired lately, and your eating habits have changed. Do you think it's an illness? Lyra asked. Perhaps I'm not adapting well to Earth's atmosphere. A strange look crossed James's face, hope mixed with worry. I think we should visit Dr. Patel at the medical center. 2 hours later, Lyra lay on an examination table while Dr. Patel, a human female with kind eyes and steady hands, moved a scanning device across her blue skin. This can't be, Dr. Patel whispered, staring at the screen. What is it? Lyra asked, fear making her markings pulse rapidly. The doctor turned the screen so both Lyra and James could see the image. Princess, you're pregnant, approximately 12 weeks along. Lyra's silver eyes widened in shock. That's impossible. I was tested 7 times by the royal physicians. I cannot bear children. James took her hand. You couldn't bear Orician children, he corrected gently. But as I told you when we first met, human biology is different. Dr. Patel nodded. From what we can see, the Orician female reproductive system requires certain hormones that Orician males produce. Humans don't produce these same hormones, so your body didn't reject conception. A baby. Lyra whispered, her free hand moving to her stomach, where a slight swelling was now noticeable. Our baby. James smiled. Half human, half Orician. The first of its kind. Lyra's markings suddenly glowed brighter than James had ever seen, pulsing with joy and wonder. Then, just as quickly, they dimmed. My father, she said, her voice hollow. The royal family. They will demand answers. Let them, James said firmly. This changes everything, Lyra. You're not barren. You never were. Dr. Patel showed them more images on the screen. The child appears healthy, a perfect blend of both species. The heart is strong, though positioned slightly differently than either a human or Orician baby. The skin shows early signs of bioluminescent markings. Lyra stared at the image, torn between joy and fear. My people considered me worthless because I couldn't continue the royal line. Now I carry a child no one thought possible. Is the pregnancy dangerous? James asked the doctor. We'll monitor it closely, Dr. Patel replied. But so far, everything looks remarkably normal, considering the circumstances. The baby is developing well. As they left the medical center, a message arrived on James's official communication device. He read it and looked at Lyra with concern. What is it? She asked. Word has reached Oricia. Your father demands we return immediately for questioning. Lyra's hand went protectively to her stomach. The king cannot be kept waiting. We don't have to go, James said. You're my wife now. Earth can protect you. Protect us. She shook her head, royal determination returning to her face. No, my father deserves to know the truth, and my brother must answer for what he did, sending me away believing I was flawed when I wasn't. It could be dangerous, James warned. Lyra's markings pulsed with new confidence. I left Oricia in shame, believing I had failed my bloodline. I will return carrying the future, a child that bridges our worlds. James nodded, seeing the princess who had first stepped off that transport ship 6 months ago. Proud, regal, and unafraid. Then we faced them together, he said. All 3 of us. The royal palace of Oricia loomed above them, its crystal towers catching the light of all 3 moons. James felt Lyra tense beside him as their transport landed in the royal courtyard. After 3 months of delay and negotiation, they could no longer avoid this confrontation. Are you ready? He asked softly. Lyra placed a hand on her now visible pregnancy bump. At 5 months along, there was no hiding her condition. Her royal robes had been specially designed to accommodate her changing body. No, she admitted, but it doesn't matter. My father has commanded our presence. Royal guards surrounded their transport as soon as it touched down. Their expressions were unreadable, but James noticed how their eyes kept darting to Lyra's stomach. News of her pregnancy had spread through the empire like wildfire. Commander Vex stepped forward to greet them. His posture was stiff, his markings pulsing with tension. Princess Lyra, Ambassador Reed. King Vorn awaits you in the throne room. They walked through familiar hallways that now felt foreign to Lyra. Noble Orisians lined the path, whispering behind their hands as the couple passed. Some looked disgusted, others curious, and a few seemed almost hopeful. They stare as if I'm carrying a monster, Lyra whispered. You're carrying the unknown, James replied. That frightens some people. The great doors to the throne room swung open. Inside, King Vorn sat rigid on his crystal throne. His markings glowed with barely controlled anger. Prince Tala stood to his right, his expression carefully neutral. As tradition demanded, Lyra walked forward alone and knelt before her father. James remained 7 steps behind, as was proper for a royal consort. Rise, daughter, the king said, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. Let me see what you claim to carry. Lyra stood, her chin high, one hand resting protectively on her stomach. I carry a child. Father, your grandchild. Impossible, shouted the royal physician, Drell, from his position near the throne. I tested the princess myself. 7 times. She lacks the fertility factor. May I speak, Your Majesty? James called from his position. All eyes turned to him. The king studied him coldly before nodding once. James stepped forward to stand beside his wife. Your Majesty, the tests were accurate, by Orisian standards. Princess Lyra cannot conceive with an Orisian male. But human biology is different. We don't produce the hormone that prevents Orisian females from conceiving. Convenient, Prince Tala said softly, or perhaps calculated. The king's markings flashed with sudden suspicion. Is this some human trick? Did you know this would happen, Ambassador Reed? I suspected it might be possible, James admitted. Our scientists had theories about cross-species compatibility, but no way to test them until now. The room erupted in angry murmurs. The king raised his hand for silence. You deliberately deceived us, King Vorn demanded. Lyra stepped forward. Father, no one was deceived. I was given away because I was considered worthless. James accepted me knowing I might never bear children. And yet here you stand, obviously fertile, the king said. How do we know this child is truly yours? Perhaps it is some human deception. At this insult, Lyra's markings flared brightly with anger. The entire court gasped at such an emotional display from the normally controlled princess. Test me, she challenged. Have your physicians examine me. This child grows within my body. It carries both human and Orisian DNA. It is the first of its kind, a true bridge between our worlds. Dr. Drell stepped forward nervously. Your Majesty, we could conduct tests immediately. The royal medical chambers are prepared. The king stared at his daughter for a long moment, then at her human husband. Very well, he said finally. We will have the truth of this matter. But know this, Ambassador Reed. If you have practiced deception upon the royal house of Orisia, no diplomatic immunity will save you. James met the king's gaze steadily. I welcome the tests, Your Majesty. The only deception was believing your daughter was anything less than perfect. The king's markings pulsed with surprise at this boldness. Prince Tala, standing quietly by the throne, allowed a small smile to cross his face. Take them to the medical chambers, the king commanded. I want answers by morning. The royal medical chambers buzzed with activity through the night. Dr. Drell and his team ran every test they could imagine on Princess Lyra and her unborn child. By morning, the truth could no longer be denied. It is her child. Drell confirmed to the king in the private royal council room. The DNA shows both Orisian and human patterns combined in ways we've never seen before. The child is developing normally, though with unique characteristics. King Vorn sat heavily in his chair. And her condition. The reason she could not conceive with our kind, exactly as the human claimed, Drell admitted reluctantly. Princess Lyra's body rejects a specific hormone our males produce. Human males don't create this hormone, so her body accepted the pregnancy. Prince Tala, who had remained silent during the report, finally spoke. "This changes everything, Father. My sister is not barren. She simply needed a different mate." The king's markings pulsed with complex emotions. "It makes her situation more complicated, not less. What is this child? Neither fully origin nor human. Where will it belong?" "The child belongs to both worlds," came a voice from the doorway. They turned to see James standing there, his face showing the strain of a night spent watching over his wife during the endless tests. "Ambassador," the king said coldly, "you are not invited to this council." "Perhaps he should be," Prince Tala suggested. "This matter concerns him directly." The king waved a hand impatiently, allowing James to enter. "The tests confirm what I told you," James said. "Princess Lyra carries our child. A new kind of life, but a natural one." Natural. The king's markings flashed with anger. "There is nothing natural about this. In all our history, origins have never bred with other species." "Because you never tried," James replied simply. "Or because those who did were hidden away, as you planned to hide Lyra." The king rose to his feet, his royal markings glowing fiercely. "Watch your tongue, human. You may have married my daughter, but you know nothing of our ways." Before James could respond, the council room doors burst open. A royal messenger rushed in and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, there are crowds gathering in the capital square. Word of Princess Lyra's condition has spread throughout the city. The people demand to see her." "What kind of crowds?" Prince Tala asked sharply. "Angry ones." The messenger shook his head. "No, Your Highness. They're celebrating. They're calling it a miracle, a sign that origins can expand beyond our current limitations." The king sank back into his chair, his markings dimming with shock. "Celebrating? This makes no sense." Prince Tala moved to the window and looked out over the capital city. "It makes perfect sense, Father. Our empire has not expanded in 3 generations. Our population growth is stagnant. Many families struggle with fertility issues. Now suddenly, there's new hope. Hope based on mixing our royal blood with aliens." The king demanded. "Hope based on finding new solutions to old problems," Tala corrected. "The conservative nobles will oppose this, of course. But the common people, they see potential." James watched this exchange with growing interest. The political landscape was shifting before his eyes. "Where is my daughter now?" the king asked. "Resting in her old chambers," James replied. "The tests were exhausting for her." Prince Tala turned from the window. "Father, we must decide how to respond to this situation. And quickly. Half the noble houses are demanding Princess Lyra and her human be exiled for this abomination. The other half want to study what they've accomplished." "And what do you recommend, my son?" the king asked, studying Tala's face. "Embrace this change," Tala said firmly. "Present Lyra and her child as the future of our people. Show the empire that the royal house leads the way into a new era." The king's markings pulsed with uncertainty. "The old ways have served us well for thousands of years." "The old ways brought us to stagnation," Tala countered. "Perhaps this unexpected child is exactly what our empire needs." James looked between father and son, sensing the balance of power shifting. Prince Tala had always been known as a progressive voice in the royal family. Now he had the perfect opportunity to push his agenda forward. "I should return to Lyra," James said carefully. "She'll want to know what you've decided." The king's silver eyes fixed on him. "Tell my daughter nothing has been decided yet, but she will appear before the people tomorrow. They deserve to see this miracle, or abomination, for themselves." 4 months passed since their return to Arisia. The political storm continued to rage through the royal court, but Princess Lyra had found an unexpected ally in her brother, Prince Tala. With his support, she and James had been allowed to remain in the royal palace to await the birth of their child. Today was that day. The palace halls echoed with urgent footsteps as servants rushed back and forth. Princess Lyra had gone into labor in the early morning hours, and now both Arisian and human medical teams worked together in the royal birthing chamber. James paced outside the chamber doors, his face tight with worry. On Earth, he would have been at his wife's side, but Orician tradition kept fathers away until after the birth. "Sit down, Ambassador," Prince Tala said, watching from a nearby bench. "Your pacing helps no one. On Earth, husbands stay with their wives during childbirth," James explained, not stopping his movement. "Another strange human custom," Tala remarked, "yet not without merit, perhaps." A servant rushed past, carrying clean linens into the birthing chamber. Through the briefly opened door, they heard Lyra cry out in pain. James stopped pacing and turned toward the sound. "I should be in there." To his surprise, Tala stood and approached the guards at the door. "Let him enter," he commanded. The guards looked uncertain. "But Your Highness, the traditions." "This is not a traditional birth," Tala said firmly. "Let him enter." Inside the chamber, Lyra lay on a special birthing bed. Her blue skin was pale, her markings pulsing rapidly with pain and effort. Dr. Petal from Earth worked alongside Dr. Drell, monitoring equipment from both worlds. "James," Lyra gasped when she saw him. She reached out a trembling hand. He rushed to her side, taking her hand in his. "I'm here. I'm not leaving you." Dr. Petal looked up in surprise. "Ambassador, Orician protocol allows you in here." "Protocol has changed," he said simply, focusing on his wife. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. The medical teams worked together, confronting challenges neither had faced before. The child's mixed biology created unique situations that required quick thinking and cooperation. "The baby is coming," Dr. Drell announced finally. "One more push, Princess." Lyra gripped James's hand with strength that would leave bruises. She cried out, a sound that echoed through the royal palace, and then it was done. A new cry filled the room. Smaller, higher, but strong. "A girl," Dr. Patil announced, holding up the infant for them to see. A healthy baby girl. The child was remarkable. Her skin was a lighter blue than pure Orician's, and already they could see faint luminescent patterns forming across her tiny body. But unlike Orician markings, which followed strict genetic patterns based on family lines, these markings swirled in new, never-before-seen designs. "She's beautiful," James whispered, tears streaming down his face. Dr. Drell examined the child with wonder. "Her vital signs are strong. Heart rate faster than an Orician child, but slower than a human's. Perfect middle ground." The doors to the chamber suddenly opened. Cain Vorn himself stood there, his royal markings pulsing with emotion he tried to hide. "Father," Lyra said weakly, "come meet your granddaughter." The king approached slowly, his eyes fixed on the infant. The room fell silent as he reached the bedside. Even the doctors stepped back, giving the royal family this moment. "She glows," the king said softly, watching the unique patterns that danced across the baby's skin. "Different from any royal markings I have ever seen." "We want to name her Nova," Lyra said. "It means new star in Earth language." The king reached out a hesitant finger to touch the child's cheek. The baby turned toward his touch, her eyes opening for the first time. Unlike the silver eyes of Oricians or the varied colors of humans, her eyes were a brilliant gold. "Nova," the king repeated, his voice hushed. A fitting name. To everyone's shock, a single tear slid down the king's face, glowing slightly with the same bioluminescence all Oricians shared. "The ancient texts speak of a child who would unite the stars," he said quietly. "A royal born of 2 worlds, with markings never seen before and eyes of gold." James looked up in surprise. "What texts?" Prince Tala, who had entered behind his father, answered. "The prophecies of origin. Stories most consider myths." He stared at the child with new intensity. "Until now." The king straightened, his regal bearing returning. "The child will be presented to the people tomorrow. They must see that the royal line continues. in ways none of us could have imagined. 1 year passed since Nova's birth. The royal palace of Arisia, normally a place of rigid tradition, had been transformed. The grand ceremonial hall, with its crystal columns and luminescent floor, now hosted representatives from 12 different species across the galaxy. The occasion: Princess Nova's first birthday and the signing of the Interspecies Genetic Compatibility Treaty. Lyra stood beside James near the throne, watching their daughter play with a floating toy. Nova had grown quickly over the past year. Her blue skin, lighter than pure Arisians, glowed with those unique swirling patterns that had never been seen before. Her golden eyes sparkled with intelligence beyond her age. "She already understands both languages," Lyra whispered proudly. "And yesterday, she made her toy light up just by touching it." James smiled. "Earth scientists say her brain activity shows patterns they've never seen before. She may develop abilities neither of our species have." King Vorn entered the hall, his royal robes flowing behind him. The crowd fell silent as he approached the central platform. He looked older than a year ago, but his eyes held new energy. "Representatives of the 12 worlds," he began, his voice carrying through the hall. "1 year ago, my granddaughter was born. A child that should have been impossible. A child that many, including myself, first viewed with suspicion and fear." The king's gaze fell on Nova, who stared back at him with those remarkable golden eyes. "I was wrong," he continued, causing murmurs to spread through the crowd. "Orisian kings rarely admitted errors. What I feared as unnatural was simply new. What I saw as a problem was actually a solution." Prince Tala stepped forward, holding a crystal tablet. Over the past year, he had become the face of Arisia's new approach to interspecies relations. "Today we signed the Interspecies Genetic Compatibility Treaty," Tala announced. "All 12 worlds agree to share medical knowledge, to study cross-species compatibility, and to protect the rights of mixed-species children." Dr. Drell and Dr. Paddle stood together near the front of the crowd. Their joint research team had made remarkable discoveries in the past year, studying Nova's development and exploring other potential compatible species. "Because of Princess Nova," Tala continued, "we now know that at least 27 species across our galaxy may be compatible in ways we never imagined. Populations facing extinction may find new hope. Medical treatments thought impossible are now being developed." One by one, representatives from each world stepped forward to sign the treaty. Some looked like walking plants, others like crystalline structures, and a few resembled neither humans nor Arisians. Yet all approached with respect, many pausing to bow to the small princess who watched with curious golden eyes. When the ceremony ended, the hall transformed for the celebration. Nova sat in a special chair at the center, receiving gifts from across the galaxy. James and Lyra stood proudly nearby, accepting congratulations and well wishes. King Vorn approached them quietly, away from the crowd. "I once demanded answers from you, Ambassador Reed," he said, "about how this miracle was possible." James nodded. "And now you have those answers, Your Majesty." The king smiled slightly, watching Nova charm a group of diplomats with her glowing finger patterns. "Not all of them, I think. Some questions about your daughter may take a lifetime to answer." Lyra took her father's hand. "Are you still angry that we changed everything, Father?" The king's markings pulsed with gentle light. "Change comes whether we welcome it or not, daughter. I have lived long enough to know this. Better to guide the change than to fight against it." Prince Tala joined them, a satisfied smile on his face. The conservative houses are finally quieting their protests. Nova's popularity with the people grows daily. And our scientists have identified 3 more potentially compatible species just this month. "You planned this all along, didn't you?" James asked Tala quietly. "When you arranged our marriage." Tala's markings flickered with amusement. "Let's just say I suspected there might be more possibilities than our rigid traditions allowed for. Sometimes the best path forward requires a little creativity." The sound of laughter drew their attention. Nova had created a small light show with her fingertips, entertaining a group of children from different worlds. None of them seemed to notice or care about their differences. "Look at them," Lyra said softly. "They see each other as friends, not aliens." James put his arm around his wife. "That's her real gift to both our worlds, not her unique biology or her special abilities. Hope," the king said, surprising them all. "She gives us hope." As night fell, the 3 moons of Arisia rose in the sky, casting their light through the crystal palace walls. But they weren't needed anymore. The new patterns of light that danced across Nova's skin as she fell asleep in her mother's arms were bright enough to guide them all into the future.